Redditors who have hired a private investigator. What did you find out? My mother's dad walked out on Mom, my aunt, and my grandmother when Mom was just 5. A few years later, my grandmother died of a grand mal seizure. Mom was taken in by her grandparents, but she always wondered why her dad left and what became of him. In her 40s, she saved up a bit and hired a PI to track him down. Turns out he moved over time from Pittsburgh to California, where he wound up in prison for armed robbery and other violent crimes. He died in San Quentin Penitentiary. I think Mom got a lot of closure out of that. She was able to see that life would have most likely been even worse had he stayed. At least living with her grandparents, she was loved and raised to fulfill her potential. My grandmother's first boyfriend, after my grandfather died, said he was a retired cop and a veteran. They enjoyed dancing to country music together, and bought a new car, in her name though, even though she can't drive anymore. My uncles hired a PI. Turns out, that old had a habit of shacking up with widows and bleeding them dry. The boyfriend, not the PI. When I met my wife, she seemed to have a normal modern family. 2 moms, 2 dads. Over time it became apparent her stepdad wasn't around much. Holidays, birthdays, you name it, he'd pop in to say hi, grab a nap, whatever, then take off again. My wife's family thought this was normal, just the way it had always been since they were teenagers. He claimed to have a job following FedEx trucks around the state to prevent theft and drug trafficking. But I thought it strange and started making jokes about him having another family. Well, I guess it got my sister-in-law thinking because she gets a favor from the PI at her law firm. Sure enough, he has not 2 but 3 wives around the state, and 5 other stepchildren between them. My sister-in-law breaks the news to her mother, who immediately changes the locks and files for divorce. They never speak again. Cold turkey. Divorce is even uncontested. As a foo, they also send the report to his other wives. My sister, mid-30s, is adopted and hired one to find her estranged biological father. They came back saying that not only was he still alive and nearby, but he had a daughter. Meaning she also had a biological sibling. Further digging from the PI uncovered that they weren't just similar ages either, they were exactly the same age. The evidence suggested that my sister had a twin and her birth father had taken the twin and vanished. Huge, life-changing news. Eventually, through more incredible detective work, the PI realized that the daughter was actually just my sister. There was no other sibling and they had just been investigating my sister the whole time accidentally. Needless to say, we asked for the money back. TLDR. Sister hired a private investigator accidentally investigated sister. My wife and I are friends with a lot of bar owners and bartenders because of her job. We knew this one owner tender, we will call him Dana, that was the nicest guy. Like, if he knew you were sick, he would cover your shift at your bar and then give you the tips he made that night. Just the best guy. Then one night we are drinking with another bartender friend, Ben. Ben lets us know that Dana has brain cancer. He's been keeping it quiet, but Ben has been giving him money, upwards of $5,000, for treatment. My wife and I were about to give money to Ben to pass on. Then Dana's business partner got suspicious and hired a PI to follow Dana on a day he took off for medical reasons. Turned out Dana spent the day drinking at another bar. No doctor visits. The business partner confront Dana, who comes clean. He did not have cancer. He was just saying that to get money from his friends. Apparently lots of bartenders had been giving him money. Dana is more or less run out of town. He moved to a different city, and I know he slowly paid Ben back, but it took a couple years. I'm not sure what happens to him since. My parents hired a private investigator to find out who my online BF was when I was 13. The PI came back and told us he was just a 13-yo. Hadn't heard from my mom since I was about 15, very unstable due to drugs and alcohol, etc. When I was 29, I decided it was time to find out what happened to her. I figured if she was a Jane Doe somewhere, then I could put her to rest, and if she was alive, then I wanted to let her know that I forgave her. Hired a PI to help. I guess she was moved by my story, and so she also ran info for the man my mother was apparently married to on the house. And with one clue from his report, I was able to track them down. I wouldn't have found my mom alive and was just starting out on recovery after being homeless and addicted for many years, if it wasn't for the pie who kindly ran an extra report for free. Mom has remained sober now for about 7 years and is probably the healthiest she's ever been, physically and emotionally. My story is a little different. I had a pie investigate me. About 6 years ago I became very ill with a variety of issues that left me really quite poorly. I was an optician, and so using my hands with arthritis was just never going to be a plan. So I applied for UK disability support. I sailed through, and started receiving a monthly amount. Now, fast forward a few years. I then start getting restless at home, so I retrain into a job that doesn't involve my hands. I stop receiving money, except for the benefit you can get while you work. I use it for paying a better automatic car off. Well, my very nasty mother's friend saw me start work and called the benefits office, assuming I was still claiming. Unfortunately, she exaggerated and told them I was living a normal life and even running daily. So the benefits office filmed and watched me. They thought they had an aha, gotcha moment. Their pie provided photos of me walking unaided. When I sat in the meeting, with a lot of smug fraud officers and my solicitor, I felt sick to my stomach. I really couldn't work out was going on. They were trying to make it look like I had been running and jogging, but I knew I walked never any further than 5 meters to my car. Anyway, solicitor pointed out the photos were screenshots of a video. Asked for the videos. Videos were of me struggling to walk. One of them I rest on my car before opening my door. Another I was going into a supermarket and had replaced my cane with the trolley to lean on. You get the picture. So, the fraud team basically said, oops, and I never heard from them again. I spend a lot of my time trying to appear normal, and it bit me in the and never trust these fraud TV shows now either. I was a private investigator for a little bit. Most work PIs do is searching financial court records and serving documents. But one time I was paid by wealthy parents to stake out their college senior who had stopped returning their calls. They were worried about her. These parents paid like $40,000 for round-the-clock monitoring just to find out their daughter dropped out of school and was a full-time ski bum. By the way, stakeouts are mostly just sitting in your car reading all day. I know somebody who was like an assistant to the actual pie. She basically went to bingo with a camera in her purse to capture video of a woman. The woman claimed that a car accident had completely immobilized her, but she would take off the neck brace all the time, playing bingo hours on end. Nothing exciting, just capturing fraud. My law firm had a bad faith insurance case several years ago. A guy had gotten hurt at work. He claimed he was disabled because he hurt his back, and could not lift anything or really engage in any type of physical activity. His disability insurance carrier failed to handle the claim and pay him what was owed. There was a potential for relatively large damages. In fact, the carrier filed in the court case what is known as an offer to confess judgment. It's a way of agreeing to let judgment be taken for that amount. The plaintiff can accept the offer or reject it. However, if he rejects the offer, he is responsible for the defendant's attorney's fees if the verdict ends up being less than the amount of the offer to confess judgment. The offer in this case was $750,000. He rejected the offer. A few weeks later, our pie found out that the plaintiff bowled every week. The pie got video of the plaintiff bowling and copies of his score sheets going several years back through the date of the accident. It was clear he really was not disabled. He also found that plaintiff had been in a car wreck and was making identical injury claims to the other driver's insurance carrier. We filed a motion with the court to dismiss the lawsuit based upon fraud and perjury. The court set the motion for a hearing, but before that happened, the plaintiff dismissed his lawsuit. In his 20s, Miso hired a pie to find out what had become of the childhood bully who had made his life, and who had vowed to him. Actually, he did try by bringing a loaded gun to school, but some other kid ratted him out and the bully got expelled, but still lived in the neighborhood for a few more years and beat up Miso every chance he got. The pie found the bully living in a town more than an hour outside the big city, in a dead-end job. He'd been arrested for assault and public drunkenness a couple times. That info helped Miso get past his fear that the guy would find him someday and make good on his threat. I had a girlfriend that worked for one for a while. She said that the majority of their work was insurance scams. She took a lot of pictures of guys who said they were hurt on the job playing golf and surfing and such. I used to work for an insurance defense firm years ago. Best pie story I have is where we hired one to tail a guy who was suing our client for an injury that wasn't entirely our client's fault. The guy was refusing to settle, and was insisting on going to trial even though we offered a fair sum that would have paid his medical bills. The pie we hired got some good pics that showed the plaintiff was nowhere near as injured as he claimed, but the crown jewel of the photos was one where the guy was walking on a pier with a woman who wasn't his wife. Had his hand on her. And everything. Later in a deposition, the attorney slid the picture to the plaintiff and said something like, "Mr. Smith, obviously not his real name, who is the woman in this picture. We would like to schedule a deposition with her as well." The guy went ghost white and told his attorney he wanted to settle. At least he was smart enough to realize that if his wife found out the other woman was gonna be deposed, he was gonna have to get a family law attorney as well, because the divorce papers would soon follow. Edit. Wow, this blew up overnight. To clarify some points in the comments, no, this is not technically blackmail. Our firm had the pie follow him to see if he was faking his injuries, which is standard operating procedure, not to see if he was cheating on his wife. We had no idea he was doing that. The fact the woman in the picture was his mistress was irrelevant. The attorney would have asked for the person's contact info even if she were just a friend, coworker, cousin, or whatever. The attorney wanted to depose her to ascertain the extent of the guy's injuries. At no point did the attorney say, "Drop the suit or wheel out your affair to your wife." Had a babysitter we thought was stealing from us. Luckily our neighbor was a pie couple and they ran a background check for $10. Babysitter had a string of dues and a few days before a large fine was due, my camera disappeared. He also stole money from my kids' piggy banks. He sort of disappeared but was also really into Instagram, so I surreptitiously followed him. He started babysitting again for a single mom, easy target, and posted a lot of fun pics with this family. I tracked down the mom and sent her a long email detailing out his whole scam. She said we were right and it was clear he'd been stealing from her business. He has since gone underground, but I still Google him regularly to see what he's up to. He's been able to avoid arrests for a while now. My mom's best friend. She divorced her husband and was awarded full custody of their daughter. His family was a show. He kidnapped his daughter, and he and his parents just disappeared. This was easier in 1977 than it is now. She tried hiring a pie, but couldn't afford one. So she started learning how to trace people on her own. In the days before the internet, she spent years doing this whenever she wasn't waitressing. She did find her daughter in '81, but by this time her daughter was poisoned against her. Mom's friend went on to get her pie license, and was a pie specializing in women's issues for the next 2 decades. I don't know what happened to her after that. If she's alive, she would be in her 80s, I think. Edit. Thank you for the upvotes, everyone. There's a couple of common questions that people are asking about this. 1. Did mom and daughter reconcile? I asked my mother about that. She lost contact with her friend when mom left Texas over 20 years ago. The last she knew, no. They never reconciled. They communicated. That's it. 2. What about the police? As I explained to another comment, it was different in the 70s. Unlike now, it was easy to assume a new identity, and easy to get lost. It was hard to find people who didn't want to be found. The most popular method of assuming a new identity became a plot point in the 1986 movie, Highlander. Police usually considered kidnapping by a spouse to be a civil matter, to be handled by the courts. It was low priority for the police. Amber Alerts weren't a thing until 1986. Before that were just milk cartons with pictures of kids on them. Not a pie and haven't hired one, but I used to work in the office of a pie firm that specializes in insurance fraud. I would edit and sometimes write surveillance and background investigation reports that we passed along to our clients, mostly lawyers and insurance companies. One thing that never failed to surprise me: an astounding number of people who claim to suffer devastating disabilities regularly post pictures, videos of themselves running marathons and building decks in their yards. I'm comfortable saying that in at least half of the cases I handled over 2 years, our clients flagged their claimants as fraudulent because of social media. Disgruntled exes are another significant source of tips. To give an example of one of the more remarkable instances in which social media saved a case, it's summer, and on the day of surveillance, our investigator sees the claimant and his family loading their car with beach stuff. The claimant drives for a couple of hours before the investigator eventually loses sight of the vehicle. Side note, tailing someone in a vehicle without 1, arousing suspicion, or 2, losing the vehicle is hard. The investigator, being way too far from his own home to drive home, checks into a motel. The next morning, he checks his phone and finds that the claimant checked in at a water park on Facebook. Investigator makes a pit stop to buy some swim trunks and a beach towel, drives to the water park, and gets hours of covert footage of the claimant swimming in a wave pool, going down water slides, picking up and putting down his kids, and generally doing a whole lot of things you probably shouldn't be able to do with a serious spine injury. TLDR. If you're gonna commit insurance fraud, stay the off of social media. I never hired one, but my husband is a private investigator and owns a pie business. I have also helped with some surveillance. So, very often, you do not find anything. There isn't anything to find. You have clients wanting to catch their spouses cheating, but they really aren't doing anything. Sometimes, you realize that the client is mentally ill and very paranoid, so we can hook up cameras in the house, but no one is really moving the furniture around or stealing. I will tell you that if my husband really believes it's mental illness, he will not take the job or will cease the job once this is suspected. They need a psychiatrist, not a pie, and he's not cool with taking money from those people. He worked on a pretty high-profile case. It involved several murders over a few years. My husband obviously knew a lot of inside stuff that never made it into the news. He found out a lot of interesting stuff there. He would read the Web Sleuths forum about the case and laugh at the armchair detectives. On the other end of the pie spectrum, I was in a bad car accident 13 years ago. I was rear-ended at a red light by a lady going 45. Most of my injuries were soft tissue damage minus the TMJ. Fast forward 8 years, finally had my court day to see if I'd get $90,000 in damages. They show camera footage from 4 years prior covering 3 whopping days of me pushing a grocery cart, carrying groceries and talking on the phone. Apparently that's enough to determine that you're fine. Present day. Every morning my hands go numb. It takes 3 days to clean one room. I can't braid my hair. Various other numerous tasks that take me way longer than any other normal 41-year-old. Sometimes you have to do things because you still want to feel normal. Not like you're a 90-year-old woman. My good friend was only raised by her mom growing up, who would always tell her that her father had walked out on them when she was a baby and that he had never wanted anything to do with her. My friend took it really hard and struggled through her entire childhood believing in that, but then a couple of years ago she hired a private investigator to see if they could find him again. Well, they did, and it turned out what her mother told her was a lie. Her dad is seriously one of the sweetest S&D soft-hearted guys I've ever met. He left because my friend's mom forced him out when he uncovered her infidelity. I guess he wasn't actually her dad, because her mom cheated on him while they were together, but he loved her like she was his own and has only avoided contacting her because her mom convinced him he legally has no rights to her child, and, even worse, she threatened to accuse him of molesting my friend when she was a baby if he reached out anyway. Thankfully my friend is an adult now and has moved out from her mom's house, and she can have the relationship with her dad that she always wanted. It just sucks that she had to go through the effort of hiring a pie to achieve that. Edit. I talked to my friend to get a few more details and apparently the "left when she was a baby" thing was a bit of an exaggeration. He left when she was about 22 months old. He only found out she wasn't his child a month prior to that. To be quite honest, I never questioned that it might be weird for them to be so connected to each other emotionally because in his eyes she is his daughter and her eyes, he is the dad she briefly had and then was denied access to her entire life. They have a great relationship now and she's gone NC with her mom. Edit 2. Finding him had to do with tracking down the man whose name is on her birth certificate. That man is her dad, aka not her bio dad. Even in 2020 I struggle to picture a private investigator as anything but a man in a beige trenchcoat and a trilby. One of my jobs is to search for long-lost relatives, usually several generations ago. Typically, the case is about old plots of land where I should track down owners, or their heirs to update the land registry because a state wants to build there something. Let me tell you, the amount of information you can find on Google and in public records is astounding if you know where to look. My uncle was a private investigator. In high school my friends and I were getting flashed by a guy constantly. He would do thing like iron wire at his window every time the bus dropped us off. I hated it, so told my uncle, who was very concerned this guy's behavior would escalate. So he started filming him doing it, then went on a local news program to discuss it, and the guy moved out the next day. Not mine specifically, but my mother hired one to spy on the school. See, my little brother is dyslexic and has severe social anxiety, and so was struggling a lot in a public school setting. He had an IEP, which the teachers and principal were insisting was being followed. But every day my brother would come home in tears, shaking because he felt abandoned. So mom hired the investigator, and sure enough the teachers were basically just ignoring my brother. They'd sit him in the back of the room and demand he do his work, then wouldn't help him through it. Then they'd yell at him because he didn't do it. Again, he couldn't write because of the dyslexia. With all the evidence, my mom was able to arrange a meeting with the school board and threatened to sue. They agreed to pay his tuition for a private school that was supposed to help. It didn't, and mom ended up just pulling him out and homeschooling him. He's been doing a lot better. My work requires us to hire PIs to investigate injury claims. We had this high schooler claiming a head injury so severe that he basically couldn't live a normal life. Specifically, he had an issue with bright lights. Couldn't stare at a computer or TV long, etc. Our PI caught him on several occasions at the movies, arcade, basketball games, etc. So basically he was making a fraudulent claim. Inferent. Not me, but my dad. My mom's a hoe. I could have told him myself, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings and he wanted hard evidence anyway. ETA, if I remember right, it was 5 different guys at one time. One might have been the dealer, but he might have come later. It's been a while and there was a lot to keep up with. Pi was like, "I'm sorry, you really got your money's worth." I had his back twice by telling the guys that she was married and that we all still lived together. Pretty entertaining breakups were my immediate reward. Not having to go with her to watch her date guys behind my dad's back was my long-term reward. Turns out, dad doesn't have any bio children. My dad was cheating on my mom with _2_ different old men. Both of them don't know about the other one. He says he isn't. Or anything, he's doing it for the money. He told us that he's in their wills and everything and that they're just friends. I don't believe it. How do you end up in a friend's will? There's definitely something else going on, but he won't admit it. My mom calls him El Butra as a code word for him. It means the vulture in Spanish. Edit spelling. My boyfriend's family hired a PI to do some covert genealogy, because they're white but all have thick wiry hair that only black hairdressers can handle. And because there are things older folks in these parts just don't talk about. Turns out there's a fair amount of Lumbee Indian, a community founded by disenfranchised Native Americans and escaped slaves back in the day, in boyfriend's family, which explains the hair. She wasn't cheating. She was training racing pigeons of all things. ? I know someone that hired a pet detective to find their cat and he found him. I was the recipient of a PI. I came home from work one day and my BF asked to have my engagement ring as he wanted to take it to be professionally cleaned. The second he handed it over he accused me of cheating on him. The conversation went back and forth for ages. I was beside myself. I couldn't believe what he was saying and he would not believe I was innocent. He then told me he'd had me followed for 6 weeks by a PI who had seen me get into a red Mini. It was a girl I knew giving me a lift to work, but he would not believe me. I knew then it was over and packed my things and left. I told him to get in touch with the PI and have another look at this so-called evidence that I was cheating. An hour later he turns up at where I was staying begging to have me back. He'd realized his mistake. There was no way I was going to get back with someone who would behave that way though, so we parted ways. I had one hired against me, and they found out everything. Tattoos that aren't visible normally, the address I lived at in a different country, medical records from an accident that happened 6 years prior, so many random things that aren't publicly available. Not the person who hired them, but my father hired one and found out my mom cheated on him while they were married. My father still has the evidence in his house. Edit 1. Clarification. The only reason I know is because my dad told me and showed me the DVD trying to make me watch it to hate my mom. I hired a pie to follow the first pie I got to see if he was doing his job. I got hired to look into another pie just to ensure he was doing his job. Later we found out that each of us were looking for each other to be investigated. There were 3 of us. Basic, not exciting answer, but I hired one through our adoption attorney to find one of my foster children's biological father. Pi found a phone number and 2 addresses, so hopefully that's enough to serve papers and continue with the adoption. My dad hired a Pi in the mid-90s in Eastern Europe to find out if one of his business partners was stealing from him. Instead he found out his own brother was stealing from him. He refused to believe the Pi and his brother robbed him blind. Took a huge amount of money and left him with gigantic debt. He still forgave him. I used to work for an insurance company that handled injury claims. More often than not, the investigator would find nothing, or would give us a lot of video showing that the claimant was indeed injured. We would then bury the video, of course. There are, on occasion, people who are exaggerating their injuries, but they are by far the minority. The few cases where that does happen has a way of placing unfair suspicion on the legitimately injured people. My fave example was a time when the insurer sent me hours of video where they had followed this young, healthy-looking, and quite physically fit fella around, leaving his house, going and working outside on a home renovation, doing lots of heavy lifting, carrying things up and down ladders. All this despite a reported back injury. The insurance adjuster was all gung-ho on taking the case to trial without making any offers. Lo and behold, I look at the video, check the age of the claimant in the file, and think to myself, this guy looks awfully young for someone in his 50s. 10 minutes of Facebook research later, I work out that the Pi had been following the claimant's 25-year-old son for 2 weeks. The few cases where there is actual fraud make for good stories and get told and retold, but in reality the vast majority of claimants are on the level despite insurance company cool-aiders wanting to believe otherwise. I spent a lot of time having to talk them down while I did that work. She was playing pat a cake with my boss. They knew all the moves. Clapping, cross-clapping, double clapping. The line about the baby and the oven. I was devastated. Back in the 90s my dad had a friend who owned a Renault Clio Williams, and one day someone stole his car. The car was located in Athens. So after reporting the event to the police he really wanted to get his car back, because it was expensive, and he hired a private investigator to find his car. After like a week he received a call from the investigator telling him that his car was located at a junkyard outside of Thessaloniki. So he went at Thessaloniki and found his car, so he rushed inside a police station to inform them that his car is located at X location. Believe it or not, the officer told him not to mess with the owner of the junkyard. This junkyard was known for stealing cars etc., and hope he will get his money back from insurance. Edit. Sorry for any mistakes, I am not a native speaker. Not me, but a friend hired one because he was suspicious his stepdad was being unfaithful to his mom. So, he asked me, and I put him in contact with a guy the first knew. Bit of a backstory, the stepdad is 5 feet 10 inches, 160-ish pounds. My friend is 6 feet 2 inches, 235 pounds, ripped. At 15, when my friend's mom and stepdad started dating, my friend gave the typical, "You hurt her, you're dead" speech. Also his bio dad walked out on him and his sister when my friend was like 4. It took a while, but my friend warmed up to the guy and he's a good guy, took my friend and I to an 49ers game once, which was pretty cool. Anyways, the Pi said he wasn't cheating. Apparently there was a house on the market that my friend's mom wanted, and he bought it. He had been remodeling it for some time and he kept it a secret. As a 5-year anniversary gift to her, he bought it. Anyways, they live in a 5-bed house now. Sometimes I get to figure out that people's kids aren't really their kids, which is kinda sorta like the work that most private investigators do. My uncle disappeared without a trace in the 1990s, about a year after his daughter was kidnapped and murdered. We hired a pie to track him down, and the pie found next to nothing. As my uncle had developed a problem following my cousins. The best guess the pie had is that he had died by OD or suicide, and that his body hadn't been found or he was reported as a John Doe. Imagine my family's surprise 2 decades later, when my uncle calls my mother, who was his only sibling. My grandfather had been on his deathbed for a month, and somehow the uncle found out. He arrived to make a show of paying his respects, in an attempt to get money out of his parents. When it was clear he wasn't getting anything, he took off once again. He never gave us a real or detailed explanation of why he left, where he'd been, and what he'd been doing. He left no address or telephone number and made no attempts to remain in contact. The pie we hired must have been a one, that or my uncle really knows how to disappear. I'm pretty sure my dad had PIs or some people tail me for a few days when I was younger. My siblings came up with the same conclusion for themselves and we all assumed it was just us individually being followed. I have a 19-year-old applicant who mentioned having a pie license on his resume. I am excited to find out. He has investigated that the secretary was moonlighting as an escort. Oh, and she was also the owner of the company. **edit. I think she did this to secure her position and obtain preferential treatment. She managed to get away with short days, like 1.5 hours each end, work from home, new office, exec parking space, countless sick days that the president signed off on, and I'm sure a bunch of raises. She was also at her job and all of her responsibilities became everyone else's. I know this BC the GM was the one who was asked to see what was going on, and he did just that with a pie. He and I were tight and he told me everything. She always left early on Fridays and apparently she went right to a hotel. So either she just liked to meet many stranger men for 0.5 to 1 hour, or she was an escort. She was hot too. As the story goes, the VP, also an owner, confronted the president about it and he admitted to the whole thing. They fired her and I think they gave her like 18 months of severance too. Oh, and the president gave her a goodbye party, in which he kind of said, "Guys, we all need to do better and to be better," with zero context why he'd say this. Lol. A lot of confused faces, but she seemed very happy. TLDR got secretary at the office. Got the golden parachute too. The end. So our local radio station has this charity fund thing called Good Morning Angels, and they donate money to people in need every day, normally $2,000 every day to different people. A few weeks ago a woman came on and said that she had a disabled child in a wheelchair and an older child now in her 20s. Apparently the father was molesting both the children until he went to another country for money, so the listeners didn't believe the story and the radio station decided to hire a pie to find out the real story. The pie went to the country where the father was and the father didn't hesitate or hold any info back. Long story short, after lie detector tests and everything, the mother was using her disabled child and the story that the father the children, which he did not, to get money while the father was still sending them $3,000 every month from where he was. The father has now decided to divorce the mother, but I do not know what is going to happen with regarding the law. I was suspicious that my first husband was cheating on me, so I hired a private investigator, and what happened was it turned out that my husband had a secret second job that he would go to for 3 hours at a time every few days because he was going to surprise me with a new diamond necklace for my birthday. And once I found that out, I felt super bad, so I apologized to my husband and he got really upset that I didn't trust him, and then he divorced me. Make sure to like and subscribe while watching this awesome animal.